You've probably heard the number before. Ancient humans died at 30. It shows up in classrooms, documentaries, and every conversation where someone wants proof that modern medicine turned 40 into the new 20. The number isn't fake, but it's hiding something. Picture 10 people, all born into the same ancient community. Follow each of their lives to the very end, and you will not find 10 people who each died around 30. You'll find something far stranger. A few who never made it past their first year. One who dies young from a cut that never should have been dangerous. Another who survives childbirth 3 times and lives to 50. 2 who make it into their 60s. And one cranky elder who outlives almost everyone, still convinced people built better tools a generation ago. Average all of those lifespans together and yes, you can land near 30. But not one of those 10 people actually died at 30. So what is that number really measuring? And if it isn't telling us when people died, what is it hiding? To find out, we have to go back, not to a single moment, but to the actual mechanics of survival before antibiotics, before surgery, before a hospital existed anywhere on Earth. Here's the first thing almost nobody expects. Human death throughout most of our history clustered at 2 extremes. The earliest years of life were brutally dangerous. But if a person made it past childhood, the odds shifted dramatically in their favour. Researchers who've studied traditional hunter-gatherer populations, groups whose lifestyles roughly resemble how humans lived for most of our existence, found something remarkable. Once you strip out infant and childhood deaths, the age where adult deaths cluster most often isn't 30. It's somewhere in the late 60s to mid-70s. Let that sit for a second. People in these communities were reaching ages that sound almost identical to modern life expectancy, without a single vaccine, antibiotic, or emergency room. So why does everyone believe the opposite? Because 2 very different numbers got fused into one story. Life expectancy at birth answers the question. If you average every single lifespan in a population, including all the babies who die within days, what number do you get? It's a mathematical average, and it is brutally sensitive to child mortality. But there's a second number, the modal age at death, which asks something different. Once someone survives the dangerous early years, what age is death most likely to actually happen? These 2 numbers can tell almost opposite stories about the same population, and for most of human history, they did. Birth itself was the first filter, and it was a harsh one. Human babies have unusually large heads, delivered through a birth canal shaped by millions of years of trade-offs between walking upright and giving birth safely. Without surgery, blood transfusions, or ways to stop severe bleeding, complications that are routine emergencies today could be lethal. Ancient communities weren't helpless. They had experienced birth attendants, positioning techniques, and generations of accumulated knowledge. But some emergencies simply had no solution yet. Survive birth, and the danger didn't disappear. It just changed shape. A newborn's immune system is barely functional. A mild infection that an adult shrugs off can spiral quickly in an infant. Dehydration from something as ordinary as diarrhea could be fatal within days. And then came weaning, a strange, dangerous transition where a child stops relying on breast milk's protection and starts eating food, drinking water, and touching a world full of bacteria their body has never encountered. But children who made it past these early years entered something researchers describe almost like a survival plateau. Danger dropped sharply through later childhood and early adulthood. This is the part of the mortality curve nobody talks about, because it doesn't fit the everyone died young story. It was, relatively speaking, the safest stretch of an ancient life. So if adults weren't dying at 30, what was actually killing them eventually? Rarely was it one clean cause, and almost never was it simply old age written on its own. Infection was probably the biggest threat of all. A cut from a stone tool, a broken bone that pierced skin, even a bad tooth left untreated, any of these could let bacteria into the body with nothing to stop it. Without antibiotics, an infection that starts small can spread through tissue and eventually into the bloodstream, and there was no way to reverse that once it began. Pneumonia could take down someone who had survived every other danger life had thrown at them. Accidents formed another category entirely. Hunting large, powerful animals meant risking blunt trauma, deep punctures, and crushing injuries. Climbing for honey or foraging near cliffs and rivers carried its own dangers. A broken leg on its own wasn't necessarily fatal, but a broken leg far from camp, with no way to keep the wound clean or the body fed, could become one through infection, blood loss, or simply the group being unable to stay in one place to let it heal. And then there was violence, which varied enormously from place to place and era to era. Some communities show almost no evidence of conflict for long stretches of time. Others reveal skull fractures, defensive wounds, even signs of larger confrontations. Ancient life wasn't a constant battlefield, but it wasn't universally peaceful either. The truth sits somewhere between the two extremes people tend to imagine. For women, there was an additional layer of risk that repeated itself across a lifetime. Each pregnancy and birth carried its own chance of hemorrhage, infection, or complications that could take a healthy young woman's life with very little warning. Across multiple pregnancies, that risk accumulated in a way that shaped mortality patterns differently for men and women in many ancient populations. Then why do so many ancient skeletons look young when archaeologists study them? Here's where it gets strange. Aging a skeleton isn't like reading a birth certificate. Archaeologists estimate age using things like tooth wear, joint degeneration, and bone density, indicators that become less reliable the older someone gets. Two adults who are actually the same age can show wildly different wear depending on their diet, their labour, their injuries. And here's the twist. For decades, many of the reference standards scientists used to estimate age simply didn't account for people who lived well past 50. So older individuals kept getting misclassified as middle-aged. Newer methods have started uncovering far more elderly individuals in ancient burial sites than anyone expected. The skeletons weren't lying. The old measuring tools were the problem. There's also the matter of who actually survives in the archaeological record at all. Infant bones are small, fragile, and rarely preserved. Some ancient communities buried infants differently from adults, or didn't bury them in formal cemeteries at all. Add in mobile lifestyles, scavenging animals, shifting rivers, and centuries of soil chemistry, and you start to realize that a cemetery isn't a perfect snapshot of a population. It's a heavily filtered fraction of it. So old age existed. But why did evolution bother keeping it around if reproduction was already finished by then? This is where the story gets genuinely moving. Elders in ancient communities weren't dead weight. They were walking archives. A 55-year-old might run slower than someone half their age, but they remembered which water source didn't dry up during the worst drought in living memory, which plant looked edible and wasn't, which neighbouring group could be trusted. That knowledge could mean the difference between a community surviving a bad year or not. Researchers studying this pattern have proposed that grandmothers, in particular, played an outsized role helping raise grandchildren and freeing up their own daughters to have more children sooner. Long life wasn't an accident. It may have been quietly selected for, generation after generation, because a group with elders simply outlasted a group without them. Then agriculture arrived, and here's the twist almost nobody expects. Health didn't automatically improve. Many early farming populations show worse dental decay, more repetitive strain injuries, and new epidemic diseases that spread easily once people, animals, and waste were packed into permanent settlements. Farming could feed more people. It didn't necessarily make each of those people healthier. So if you ask what age most ancient humans died at, the honest answer depends entirely on which question you're actually asking. If you mean the raw average, including every infant loss, a number near 30 isn't unreasonable. If you mean the most dangerous stretch of life, it was overwhelmingly the first few years. And if you mean the age most commonly reached by someone who survived childhood, the evidence increasingly points toward the late 60s or beyond, a number that would have sounded impossible to anyone taught that prehistoric life ended at 30. Modern medicine didn't invent old age. It made something that used to be difficult and uncertain into something ordinary. Somewhere on Earth today, someone just celebrated a 70th birthday and thought nothing of it. Thousands of generations ago, reaching that same age wasn't a miracle. It was rare, hard-won, and it happened far more often than the number 30 ever let us believe. Think about the last time you asked an older relative for advice about a decision, a relationship, a mistake you were about to repeat without knowing it. That instinct, to turn towards someone who has simply lived longer, is ancient. It's older than agriculture, older than cities, older than writing itself. Long before anyone could record knowledge on a page, an elder's memory was the only place a community's hardest lessons could survive. Every drought they'd outlived, every mistake they'd already made once, was stored nowhere else but in them. So the next time someone tells you ancient humans didn't live past 30, you'll know the real answer is far stranger and far more human. They died at 3, they died at 23, they died at 47, and plenty of them, against every danger stacked in front of them, made it all the way to 70. The tragedy was never that old age didn't exist. It's that so few people got the chance to reach it.